Welcome to World Builders Anonymous. Kick that world building addiction and actually finish that novel with your hosts Vito and John.
There's a little sync sync.
Little sinky sink action. Excuse me. 3, 2, 1, clap. And a 3, a 2, a 1, a clap. What was your...
Guess what that was?
Were you doinking?
Yeah, I was doinking something. What was I doinking?
I don't know.
Don't answer that.
I don't want to guess.
No, I have a set of collabes.
Oh, you're doinking the old collabes.
If you know what I mean. Who hasn't doinked the old collabes upon a bright midsummer morning?
It's not... It is midsummer.
What, I'm practicing for my jazz gig later. Come on.
As we all...
Get your mind out of
I don't want to continue this euphemism.
Welcome, everyone.
I don't want to be a part of this. I'm not I disavow.
No, I'm plunging right forward. We're in it now.
Don't
the
say
podcast
plunging.
has started. Oh God.
Jeez.
Anyway,
This is not going well.
You might notice that my voice is echoing quite a lot.
Or you might not, you know?
I'm thinking they are, because I can hear it all around me right now. It's just crazy. It's like I'm in a cave. It didn't spontaneously break. I dropped my interface last week, which is why there was no
Vito,
episode last
it's
week.
continuity to keep up here. You were attacked by an alligator.
I was attacked by an alligator. In the process of no, my microphone was eaten by an alligator. I punched the alligator in the stomach. It regurgitated my microphone, which flew right into my face, smacked me on the head, and made me drop my interface, which for some reason I was holding while fighting the alligator, and it fell right on the back of the cable and popped the basically the socket that the cable goes into. And I don't know how to fix it. So if any of you are mechanically minded in any way and know how to fix such a thing, let me know. But for now, I have my old USB microphone that is vastly inferior to my other microphone. But it's working for now. So we wanted to get an episode out, even though it's a little bit suboptimal with the audio quality. I'm also in a completely empty room right now because we're still moving in to our new place in South Carolina, so I'm in the cave, as it were. So you're just gonna have to deal with it. It's fine. For 1 week, maybe
plebeians.
2. You got to say it right, John. It's plebeians.
That's what I said.
Oh, okay.
It's
As long as you don't say
just weren't listening.
plebeians. Yeah,
I didn't
okay.
say plebeians.
Okay, good. That would be.
Do you accept
unforgivable.
the abbreviated plebs?
No, I don't.
No.
Because it's such a fun word to say. Why would you abbreviate it?
You plebeians.
You plebeians. Yes. You have to
So,
say it just like
Vito.
that. Anyway.
Oh,
Yes.
I thought you were done with your
I am,
your
yeah.
tangent. Okay, well, so what's on the old docket for today?
The old docket. Well, first I wanted to kind of start this episode by saying thank you to everyone who's listening to us. We have a good little crowd of you peeps. That's not what we're going to call our followers. I know everyone has to come up with like a fun name for their fans.
I don't
and
think
listeners.
we're large enough to have a
We don't have a
nickname just yet.
No, it's definitely not Peeps. I just kind of did that on the fly. That's not your name.
Yeah, I don't
worry.
wanna-
If you have any suggestions for a collective term for you all, let us know. But we appreciate you guys listening. We have about 500 or so, a little bit over, consistently listening every month, which is pretty awesome right now. And we've been doing this for nearly a year. We're coming up on a year.
I'm shocked to see that.
Yeah, in a couple of months. It's kind of crazy.
Does not feel like it's been a year.
No, it's kind of insane. So much has been happening in our lives other than writing. It doesn't feel like that's been the focus of our lives for sure, which is appropriate since we have other jobs and responsibilities and duties. John's having a baby in what is like a week or two.
Geez, like 2 weeks.
Oh my gosh, that's insane. Well,
You're telling me.
I know. I'm telling you. Yeah,
I put a car seat in my car yesterday. Not yesterday, the day before.
that's weird.
Yeah, that's in my car now.
That's real weird. Yeah.
I agree with you. Just baby stuff everywhere.
Oh,
I'm
man.
sitting next to a high chair as we speak.
Wow.
Baby can't even sit in a high chair for the next several months.
That's true. Well, that's all that to say. We've been going through a lot in our personal lives. We appreciate you guys sharing in on this element of our lives, which we very much enjoy, even though we don't get to do it all the time. And anyway, with that said, wanted to get to the proverbial docket, as it were. Just a couple things to talk about today. I've been getting back to my original story idea that I started with after a very, very brief tangent, which I was...
Your brief flirtation with the world
my
ship.
brief flirtation with world ships, yes, which I am putting in the back burner. It's still an idea I have, but I went back to my original idea, which involved the salvage divers and all that kind of stuff. And it's always so hard to begin a story. And in going back to that this week, looking at the beginnings I've written, the various ones over the years, especially for this project here in the past year. I was trying to let the ideas kind of percolate through again and wipe out the sci-fi nonsense that has replaced it.
We're going to get to it later, but
we'll get to it later. Yeah,
we got an email from a listener, and one thing they said in the email is, Vito, your wife is right. Stick to your original story.
Is that what they said? Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they're right.
That made me laugh.
Everyone's probably been like, "What is he doing? The whole point was to finish something." What is? Okay. Anyway, but yeah, in going back and looking at my beginnings I've written of this story over the past year, I've noticed a lot of them share a common flaw, which I wanted to talk about today, and I think that is, since I've had this idea for so long, far longer in one form or another than this podcast has been around, I've had the overarching plot in my head very clearly, although I don't have the specific path the characters are going to take to find their way through that plot yet. And because of that, I think I have the macro picture much more strongly in my head than the micro picture. Micro being the day-to-day, worries and cares of the characters, and the macro being the overall story into which they fit in my head. Mm-hmm. And so I've found that all of my plot, or all of my intro scenes and opening chapters that I've written in various forms, kind of share this common flaw, which is that I've basically had the plot too much in mind when starting the characters off on their story, I guess, if that makes any sense. Instead of letting the characters kind of be themselves to open the story and let the reader get a sense of who they are in their natural habitat, as it were, they all care about things directly related to the overarching plot right from the get-go in the very first scene. Mm-hmm. For example, one of the main elements of my plot is this sort of revolution story, which is not very original, but it's based on a historical event from the 12th century in Sicily, and sort of this revolving door of political, oppression, essentially, that happens when one power kind of replaces another. And, even though the people rose up and threw off one power, they did so by recruiting another major power to come in and kick that power off, and then that power becomes the new tyrannical government over them,
right.
And nothing ever really changes. And that's kind of the overall plot of the story in a nutshell. And right from the get-go, the characters are doing something that relates to that plot rather than doing something that they would be doing naturally in their own habitat, in their own day-to-day lives. So the story kind of kicks off with this pivotal event in that overarching plot, which kind of occurred to me coming back to it as too much too soon, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know who these people are yet. We don't know why they're doing what they're doing. We don't know why we should care about them. And if the only thing that draws us into a character is how much the character cares about the story, then I think usually that leads to flat characters. For example, one of my main characters, sort of the younger brother of two, he starts out the very beginning of the story right now really caring about this political intrigue and revolution and wanting to get involved with it and thinking they should do something. And the way I've been framing all of the characters in my mind is how they relate to that. Like, the dad is kind of apolitical. He is just worrying about his business. He just wants his sons to stay out of danger. The older brother kind of wants to kind of lay low, doesn't really want to make waves, but is still sympathetic. And the younger brother really wants to get involved. And that's not a problem in and of itself, but it's just that that's all I had in terms of their character.
Yeah, right.
Like, that's all they cared about, all of them. That's the major defining element of all of their personalities and their kind of day-to-day lives at this point in the story. And I realized that I should zoom out a little bit and kind of construct their lives at a equilibrium, kind of. It's equilibrium, break the equilibrium, they have to struggle to find a new equilibrium in the new conditions. That
Right.
should be the story, which we all know. We all know that the characters should start out in sort of their baseline, and then you throw them into a new situation.
Yeah.
And I thought that's what I was doing. So it's interesting that I wasn't actually, even though I was consciously following the quote-unquote right formula, I still made the mistake of putting the cart before the horse, as it were. So it's interesting that you can know how to do that and yet
Yeah.
still fall into the same trap. I was realizing as I read over the stuff I had written a little while ago in this
Yeah.
last week. So yeah, I don't know. I just kind of thought that was interesting and something that people might want to be aware of.
Yeah, and by contrast, in my story, I kind of accidentally did that. I don't think I even meant to. So Darren is trying to rescue his friends who have been essentially imprisoned as a part of this larger plot. And I'm not really showing the baseline very much, but I'm almost doing a bait and switch in a way where you kind of think the main plot has more to do with Darren trying to find his friends and get them out of prison, which is the first sort of event of the story.
Or
and it hasn't
Darren's
even
first
happened yet.
objective, kind of.
Yeah, it's his first goal, but once that happens, you kind of realize that there's a bigger thing going on, and then you sort of embark upon that as the main plot. It's kind of another way to tell a story is not with the baseline so much and just jumping into something, but not necessarily having that thing be the main plot.
Yeah, I like that. That can work. I mean, you need something to introduce yourself to the characters, and that can be either their day-to-day lives, or I think a lot of movies do this too, where I can't really think of an example right now. I'm sure there's a bunch
Indiana
of them,
Jones,
though.
maybe.
Yeah, exactly. You see the character in media res in the middle of a story going on that's not the main plot, but it kind of gives you the flavor of them. Kind of
Right.
the overarching sense of who they are and what they care about.
Right.
And sets the tone as well. Like Indiana Jones is, of course, a great example. This fun adventure movie starts out with him having a fun adventure and doing cool
Yeah.
stuff and escaping
Standing,
traps. And all
yeah,
of
in
that.
stark contrast to something maybe like Lord of the Rings, where you are seeing like the Hobbit's day-to-day life as the first, bit. And in a movie, you can't spend a lot of time doing that. But Lord of the Rings spends about as much time doing it as anyone does.
Yeah, totally.
You get a good long look at what the baseline is, and that's also a good example of how you can do more with that. You are seeing sort of Frodo's baseline life, but you're also getting an example of what he's giving up to go on this quest, and he's going through all this pain and misery on his big journey, and he's specifically giving up this, what is essentially a paradise. It's the closest thing to complete peace and harmonies you're going to find anywhere, and he's giving that up for a cause that he doesn't even fully understand, just because he's being selfless and doing it. So you can do a lot with that opening. I think the worry I think that some authors have, and a lot of new authors don't give any kind of baseline, is that when doing it, you're going to be boring, and you feel like you need to get to the action. You need to get to something interesting. And that's true. You need to get to something interesting and need to have something happening. But if you omit some kind of opening, whether that be a baseline or another story, or it's just something to get the reader interested and into the world and into the story, you're missing an opportunity to set some stuff up. You're missing an opportunity to develop character, and it goes back to the idea of the learning curve, where you don't want to start off with so much in the beginning of a book, because the reader already has to learn all the characters and learn kind of the world and what's going on generally. And then they also have to figure out the main plot. And if that all happens at the same time, it can lead to some reader burnout, because it's just a lot to learn all at once, and you get overwhelmed.
Yeah, and I think there's so much emphasis on getting that hook at the beginning of a story, which can be, an Indiana Jones style adventure scene right off the bat, or it could be just sort of a flavor of what's to come in terms of a hint of the action for later on. But I think more important than, I guess, the hook when you're first starting, especially a first draft, I think, is letting yourself kind of explore the characters in their native habitat. And even in Indiana Jones, he goes back to the school where he teaches after that first scene, and you kind of see him in his baseline habitat again before the main story starts. So even though you got that big flashy opening, you still get him at square one again. Because that is square one for him. He goes on these adventures, and he teaches at this university. Like, that's his baseline until the story happens to him, or I guess he does something to initiate the story. I was thinking a lot too about side characters in some of the more well written video games, like something like Red Dead Redemption or The Witcher or Metro, Last Light, that kind of thing, where there's these well-written sort of side characters that you come back to every once in a while that will that you really look forward to seeing again because they have this great personality and they actually seem to like care about what you're doing and add their unique sort of view on things and maybe give you new information, that kind of stuff. And I don't have any side characters yet. I was thinking to myself, I just have like the 3 main characters, and that's pretty much it. And I guess 4 main characters. And as I was thinking, like, well, they work on this like salvage ship. The father has this company, like he owns a company that does salvage dives and gets contracts for this kind of thing. There's a lot of people that are involved in that.
That's an easy transition into having some side characters.
Yeah, that would probably be those people would probably be pretty important to my main characters. Why haven't I actually written any of them? It's like just the 3 of them on this ship, and just like doing their thing. And I've had a few at certain points, but I've always kind of seen them in my mind as very flat and just kind of this background almost. So I think I need to delve more into the relationships they have that are important to them at the beginning of the story besides each other. And I think that might lead to some interesting new options that I haven't seen yet. Because every time I've started this story, it's just petered out after just a couple of chapters because I really don't have anything to keep the momentum going other than got to get to the main action.
Yep.
And again, I know that that's not the right way to go about it, and I've still fallen into that trap. So anyway, I think this week is going to focus on slowing down, filling out that beginning a little bit more, showing where everybody is at square one before everything starts happening, and saving kind of that opening scene I think I've talked about before, where they find something that's very important to the plot in one of their salvage dives. I'm going to push that off, I think, a couple chapters away and kind of back trace a little bit,
because with something like the family you have going on, the family of those 3 guys, I'm always interested in seeing like what that family dynamic is like and seeing them all together, and
I've always written them all separately, haven't I?
Exactly. I was going to say there have been really good scenes with 2 of them together at a time, but I can't recall seeing a scene of yours where all 3 are together. I think of it like in Aragon. You get Uncle Garrow, is that his name?
I think so.
Yeah, him and Aragon and
right
Rowan.
away. Spoiler.
Well, I didn't say that. You did. That was not necessary at all.
Everybody knows that.
You just tossed it in there like a grenade.
Spoiler grenade.
So right away, but early on, it has to be early on because as Vito just said, Uncle Garrow dies.
He's Uncle Ben. Just call him Uncle Ben.
Everyone knows he's Uncle Ben. Oh, it's funny. Anyway,
either from Spider-Man or Star Wars.
It doesn't matter which one. But you see all 3 of those characters together pretty quickly, and you get a sense of their dynamic, and you get a feel for when you have multiple characters interacting. You unlock the ability to expose elements of each of their characters that you wouldn't be able to if they weren't all together.
Totally.
I guess that's the main takeaway there. So getting those characters together early and allowing them to interact allows you to develop character quickly and naturally.
Yeah.
And lends itself well into moving into that hook more quickly.
Yeah, and it's hard when you have like a particular one you're following as the point of view character for a certain chapter because everything's filtered through their perspective. And so it's hard not to jump into the other characters' heads when I feel like I know them so well and give their perspective at the same time. So that's one of the challenges of writing a 3-way conversation, I guess, in that scenario. Maybe that would be a good exercise as well this week. But anyway, that's kind of, I don't want to dwell too long on that. I think I got kind of the point across. That's what I'm going to focus on this week. Did you want to get to your stuff?
Well, I didn't really do much reading, not much writing this week. I did a bit yesterday, but
I was talking about the thing you said you were going to talk about.
You said my stuff, and I thought you meant my book.
I was speaking indistinct, or whatever.
Well, yeah. I did write a bit, but nothing to write home about just yet. Still working on chapter 11, so all is going fine there. To move on to the second and final topic of our little talk here, we got a email from Laura, who begins by lamenting how difficult it is to leave reviews on iTunes.
Which is true.
For which, or to which point I sympathize, because it took me a while, and I have a degree in computer science. She's very complimentary about our podcast, which I very much appreciate. Thank you,
Aw.
Laura. Then moves on to the question / sort of prompt, and we might get to all of this, but in your podcast, you have discussed both plotting a novel and pantsing a novel. I feel I write absolutely between those two dynamics and wonder if you would consider talking about this on your podcast.
I think we've talked about that a little bit in the past. Like everybody
Yeah.
has a mix of those two. Like all writing processes or some mix of them. I'd be interested to hear kind of what her specific mix is. Like what elements of plotting and outlining she incorporates, and what elements of discovery writing she feels like are beneficial to her. I know for us, we're going more heavily on the discovery writing side right now. But I was thinking this week too about looking back again on some of my old outlines that were never complete, and trying to kind of fill those in a little bit to get more of a top-down view of the story again, as I'm kind of reintroducing myself to it. But do you have something about that?
Well, some amount of planning is ultimately inevitable, just because your brain moves ahead sometimes faster than your fingers can write words. Especially when you're not actively writing in a given moment, you're kind of thinking what comes next and planning it and like cutting off possibilities and opening up new ones. I think there's definitely value to planning and discovery writing. One forces you to be a little more intentional, and one forces you to actually get down and write the darn thing. And like you said, some combination is inevitable. And it all depends essentially on your style. There's no like black and white, have to do it this way or this way. It's, any combination of those two ideas or any others that you might have is good, as long as you're getting words on the page. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, and maybe the combination of them brings upon new advantages and new disadvantages. And it's all up to what works for you, and that's kind of what I've discovered through this process more than anything else. Is just
me too.
Do what works. Jeez,
for sure. Because I've talked about this before. I want to be a plotter, like a hardcore, heavy duty plotter who like writes out a very detailed outline and then kind of expands every little element of that outline into like a scene summary, and expands each of those summaries into full blown little chapters that I then fill out even more with dialogue and everything. But that's not how it's gone so far.
Not how it's worked out.
And that's been an interesting process to find. And maybe I'll work my way towards that as I kind of get more used to the writing process. But yeah, that's not what my creative instincts lead me to, I guess, at this point.
Yeah. And Laura says she's written 115,000 words. So,
wow.
I mean, whatever she's doing is working for her.
That's awesome.
I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, my most productive stories have been when I just improvised, at least, in terms of word count. I don't feel like that was my best writing, but
work.
I bet I could go back and look at those again and do something with them. That's not the point of this project, but
yeah,
maybe someday I'll do that. But that's awesome. That's
super
cool.
Yes. On to one more quick question, then we'll wrap up. Also, the value of asking questions about each scene. So basically what she's saying is you have a scene that you've written, and it's done, essentially. Your first draft of it is done.
Oh, I don't know what that's like.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, she's asking, what do you think about the idea of when you are looking at a completed scene or a to-be-completed scene that's planned out already, asking questions to yourself about that chapter or that scene or that moment. Something like, what else could happen here that would make this situation worse or more challenging or more uncomfortable for the characters? What could happen that could link to an earlier plot point? How could what happens here impact something further on down the line in the novel?
It's interesting,
and then working out details through that. Yeah,
it's interesting asking those questions after you've written the scene. I mean, that's definitely more of a discovery writing thing, I guess. It seems like when you've written a scene and you kind of look back on it like, oh, that just kind of came out of me. How does that fit into everything else I've done? I mean, I'm sure that's useful, and that's definitely something you got to do is ask yourself those questions. And it depends on what questions you ask. I'm sure if you came up with kind of a list of helpful questions for you that, can help you incorporate a new scene into the rest of the story, that might be good. But it's definitely good even if you're writing it with everything before that comes before in mind. But yeah, it's probably good to take a second afterwards and ask yourself questions about where it leads, for sure, too, or how you can incorporate new information that you hadn't thought of that will lead to interesting new things in the future, especially if you have certain plot points in mind and that kind of thing. Ideally, you would incorporate that before you write it, I would think. I think it's also important to ask yourself a question as you sit down to write a scene. Like, what do I want to accomplish with this scene? Story-wise, what do the characters here care about? What is their goal that they have in their minds as they're starting this scene? Where have they come from? Maybe read what you wrote yesterday, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's definitely important to always be asking yourself questions. Maybe we could even come up with a list at some point of sort of 10 questions to ask. It's a very YouTube thing. 10 questions to ask yourself before you write your next scene. It's
a Facebook article. So I agree that it is a good practice and it can really help your writing. As with all things like this, there's a line, and you have to be very careful not to bog yourself down in going over and over what you've written already, at the expense of continuing to write more and pushing through the story. This strikes me, to me, the way I'm writing and the way I'd like to write, this kind of process strikes me as something I would like to do as a revision and sort of editing tool after I finish a draft, like going back through the story with the context of the whole thing and saying, okay, we're going here. How can this scene better set that up?
Yeah.
And having the more, maybe if you plan the whole novel out, you can do this easier before you write it. But for me, because I don't know what all is going to happen, some of these questions are kind of hard to answer. And that's something that is a problem with discovery writing, is that you're going to have stuff that comes up later that you'd like to have set up earlier that wasn't because you didn't know it was going to happen.
Yeah.
So that requires revision and going back and changing stuff. But it's helpful to ask those questions as you're writing and try to push things forward and make things more cohesive and make things more interesting for the characters. And then again, ask those questions later in the revision process to make your story more cohesive and make everything flow together better. I think that's a very good practice.
Yeah, at least so we imagine. We've never actually
At least so I imagine, because I've not
before.
finished the book yet. Woe is me.
Yes, quite. But yeah, that's kind of our thoughts on that, I think.
Oh, yeah. So thank you, Laura, for the email. She also sent us a first chapter critique, which was very nice.
I thought you were going to say a basket of cookies. I didn't actually think that.
Okay. I was going to let you sit in that for a while. So, do you have anything else? Are we good to go?
I have no cookies, so no.
Okay.
Very sad. Very sad.
And no interface either. So savage. Anyway, if you enjoy the podcast, please consider giving us a review on iTunes. We appreciate that. You can find us on all the social medias, at least the normal ones that we know of, at World Builders Anonymous. That's how you can find us. We're also on Reddit, WBA_podcast. You can see us floating around at the Fantasy Writers subreddit and other places occasionally too. We have a website, www.worldbuildersanonymous.com. It has a bunch of cool stuff on there. And if you want to be like Laura and email us with comments, criticisms, questions, prompts for an episode, or even maybe a first chapter to review, if you're into that kind of thing, you can send us an email at wbapodcast@gmail.com. And I think I did everything to do.
Good job.
Thanks. Appreciate it. You were a lot of help.
I was texting our brother-in-law, actually.
Oh, okay, sure.
Anyway,
Well,
thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks, man. All right, see you guys.
This show is sponsored in part by Audible. Visit worldbuildersanonymous.com/audible to check out what the guys are listening to right now and to receive a free audiobook.